The galaxy had become accustomed to humans. After centuries of integration into the Galactic Council, most species had developed a begrudging respect for the peculiar bipeds from Sol 3. Humans were known for their tenacity, their bizarre biological quirks, and most infamously, their seemingly limitless capacity to endure what other species could not. Admiral Drake stood at the observation deck of the GCS Resilient, watching as the massive war fleet assembled beyond the crystalline barrier of the viewport. 3,000 vessels from 27 species, the largest military gathering in galactic history, all to face the Void Eaters. "The Council representatives are assembled, Admiral," said Lieutenant Morris, his typically stoic face betraying a hint of anxiety. Drake nodded. 12 years fighting the Void Eaters had worn him down to bone and grit. Humanity had been at the front lines longer than any other species, volunteering for the most dangerous missions, sustaining the highest casualties. It was what humans did, endure where others could not. When he entered the council chamber, the usual murmurs fell silent. Representatives from across the galaxy, from the towering Ulan with their silicon-based bodies to the gaseous myth contained in their environment suits, all turned to face him. "The Void Eaters have breached the Orion Spur," Drake began without preamble. "Our intelligence suggests they will reach populated systems within 30 standard days." Counselor Traz, a reptilian Drex with scales that shimmered like oil on water, leaned forward. "And your assessment, Admiral?" "We need to collapse the threshold gate in the Sagittarius arm. It's their main entry point." The chamber erupted. The threshold gates were ancient technology, built by the precursors millions of years before any current species achieved spaceflight. They enabled faster-than-light travel across vast distances. Destroying one was unthinkable. "Impossible," declared Ambassador Krell of the insectoid Vesperi. "The energy requirements alone." "We've calculated the requirements," Drake interrupted. "A targeted detonation could initiate a chain reaction." "At what cost?" asked Counselor Nema, her four eyes blinking asynchronously. Drake took a deep breath. "Someone would need to manually trigger the detonation from within the gate's central hub. The radiation would be terminal." The silence that followed was profound. "That is beyond even human endurance," said Traz quietly. "The radiation levels would kill any biological entity within minutes." Drake's face remained impassive. "We have volunteers." The council chamber fell silent again. But this time the quality of the silence was different. It was the silence of awe and horror mixed in equal measure. "Of course you do," whispered Nema. "You always do." Later, in his private quarters, Drake reviewed the volunteer roster. 5,000 names, soldiers, scientists, engineers, all willing to undertake a mission with zero chance of survival. He scrolled to the command recommendation. Captain Thomas Reed of the GCS Dauntless. Reed's file showed a man in his 40s with weathered features and steady eyes. Distinguished service record. Family, a partner and 2 children on Earth. Drake closed his eyes briefly before authorizing the selection. When Reed arrived at his office the next day, Drake didn't waste time with pleasantries. "You understand what we're asking?" Reed nodded. "Complete neural download before I go. My consciousness transferred to a quantum matrix, just in case there's something after." Drake studied him. "The scientists say the pain will be significant. Beyond anything I know, sir." Reed's voice was calm. "But if we don't stop them at the threshold, billions die, including my family." Drake extended his hand. "The Council has approved the plan. They're calling it Operation Final Stand." As they shook hands, Drake wondered if the galaxy would ever truly understand what humanity gave to ensure its survival. The GCS Dauntless sliced through hyperspace, its quantum drives pushing the limits of physics. Captain Reed stood in the command center, surrounded by his crew, all volunteers, all aware of their likely fate. The mission had been classified, but rumors spread quickly on a warship. "Approaching exit coordinates in 3 minutes, Captain," reported Navigator Wilson, her fingers dancing across the holographic interface. Reed nodded, studying the tactical display. The threshold gate loomed ahead, a massive ring-shaped structure 50 kilometers in diameter, ancient beyond comprehension. The Void Eaters had discovered how to use the gates to breach into normal space from whatever nightmarish dimension they called home. Any sign of enemy activity? Reed asked. Negative, sir, replied Tactical Officer Banks. But our sensors are limited this deep in the gravity well. Reed had expected as much. The plan relied on stealth and speed. Get in, plant the quantum disruptors at the gate's power nodes, then initiate the cascade failure from the central hub. Simple in theory, nearly impossible in execution. All hands to battle stations, Reed ordered. Prepare for emergency deceleration. The Dauntless shuddered as it tore back into normal space, alarms blaring as the sensors immediately detected multiple hostiles. Void Eater vessels, Banks shouted. 5, no, 7 capital ships. Evasive. Maneuvers, Reed commanded. Launch distraction drones and prepare boarding teams. The ship banked hard, narrowly avoiding energy beams that would have sheared through its hull. Reed had known this wouldn't be easy. The Void Eaters weren't just hostile. They were intelligent, calculating predators that fed on consciousness itself. Sir, Communications Officer Patel called out. We're receiving a transmission from the lead enemy vessel. Reed frowned. In 12 years of conflict, the Void Eaters had never attempted communication. Put it through. The main view screen flickered, and Reed found himself staring at something. Not quite humanoid, not quite anything recognizable. It shifted and flowed like oil in water, with multiple eyes that blinked in and out of existence. We know what you intend, Captain Reed, the creature spoke, its voice a chorus of discordant tones. Your sacrifice will be meaningless. Reed's blood ran cold. How did it know his name? How did it know the mission? If you know what we intend, Reed replied steadily, then you know we won't be stopped. The creature's form rippled. We have observed your species, your resilience. It is why we selected your galaxy. Your will to survive makes the consumption so much more nourishing. Banks, Reed said quietly. Target their command ship, all weapons. You cannot destroy what exists beyond your comprehension of reality, the creature continued. We have consumed 1,000 galaxies. Yours will be no different. Reed cut the transmission. Execute attack pattern Omega. Get us to that gate. The Dauntless surged forward, weapons blazing. 2 Void Eater vessels moved to intercept, their hulls absorbing. Direct hits without visible damage. Boarding teams deploy, Reed ordered. Across the ship, specialized units launched in armored pods toward the gate's maintenance access points. Each team carried a portion of the quantum disruptors needed to overload the gate's systems. Captain, Banks called out. They're targeting our engines. The ship rocked violently as multiple energy beams converged on their drive section. Reed gripped his command chair as status alerts flashed across his console. Damage report. Drive systems at 30%, reported Chief Engineer Ortiz through the comms. We've lost stabilizers and secondary power. Reed made a quick calculation. Divert all auxiliary power to forward shields. Helm, set collision course with maintenance access point Delta 7. The bridge fell silent as his order registered. Sir? Wilson asked, her voice barely audible. You heard me, Navigator. Reed's voice was iron. If we can't dock, we'll make our own entrance. As the Dauntless accelerated toward the ancient structure, Reed opened the ship-wide channel. All hands, this is the captain. Secure for impact and prepare to repel boarders. We knew this mission was one way. Now, we make it count. The massive warship hurtled toward the gate, its shields flaring against enemy fire. Reed watched the distance, counter tick down, and thought of Earth, of his family, of everything humanity had endured to reach this point. The collision alarms screamed as the Dauntless met the threshold gate with catastrophic force. The impact threw Reed across the bridge, like a rag doll. Emergency systems wailed as the ship's artificial gravity fluctuated. Through the viewport, he could see they had succeeded. The Dauntless was embedded in the gate's outer ring, creating a breach large enough for ground teams to enter. Status report, Reed croaked, pulling himself up as medical nanites in his bloodstream worked to repair his fractured ribs. Hull integrity at 40%, reported Ortiz over static-filled comms. We've penetrated approximately 300 meters into the gate structure. Reed nodded grimly. All assault teams deploy. Engineering, begin prepping the quantum disruptors. Sir, Banks interrupted. We've got internal breaches on decks 7 through 12. Void Eater boarding parties. Security teams to defensive positions, Reed ordered. We hold this ship until the disruptors are planted. As if to emphasize the direness of their situation, the lights flickered and emergency power engaged, bathing the bridge in red. Captain, Patel said, her voice tight with controlled fear. We're receiving distress signals from teams Bravo and Delta. They're being consumed. Reed had witnessed it before. The horrific way the Void Eaters absorbed their victims, extracting neural energy directly from living brains while leaving the bodies as empty husks. It was why they had come to be feared across the galaxy. Tell all teams to activate their neural scramblers, Reed commanded. And arm your sidearms. We're not going to let them take us alive. The next 3 hours were chaos. Reed led a team through the twisted corridors of the damaged ship and into the alien architecture of the gate itself. The structure was unlike anything human engineers had ever designed. Organic, yet mechanical, with pulsing conduits that seemed to breathe. According to the ancient schematics, Lieutenant Morris said, consulting his datapad, the central hub should be 2 kilometers inward. Reed nodded, checking the radiation levels on his suit's sensors. Already they were climbing beyond safe parameters. Teams Alpha and Echo, report status on the power nodes, Reed called over the tactical network. Alpha here, came a strained response. Node 1 is prepped and ready for remote detonation. We've lost Jackson and Lee. Echo reporting, another voice crackled. Node 2 secured, heavy resistance, down to 3 operators. Reed closed his eyes, briefly. Good soldiers, dying so others might live. It was the story of humanity's role in this war. Central team moving to final objective, Reed confirmed. Hold positions as long as possible. They pushed deeper into the gate, encountering sporadic resistance. The Void Eaters seemed to be concentrating their forces elsewhere. Perhaps not, believing that the humans would actually attempt to reach the central hub with its lethal radiation levels. When they finally reached the massive chamber at the gate's core, Reed understood why. The radiation here was off the charts, bombarding their suits with enough energy to cause the sensors to glitch and stutter. Suit integrity failing, Morris reported, his voice already rough with radiation sickness despite the protective gear. We have maybe 15 minutes before total system failure. Reed nodded. That's all we need. The central hub was dominated by a pulsing crystalline structure that seemed to exist partially in another dimension. Energy cascaded around it in visible waves, and looking at it directly caused nauseating disorientation. Begin placing the disruptors, Reed ordered. Morris, start the activation sequence. As his team worked, Reed felt the first symptoms of acute radiation poisoning. Nausea, followed by a metallic taste in his mouth. His suit's medical systems injected painkillers and anti-radiation compounds, but they were merely delaying the inevitable. Sir, Morris called, we've got company. A dozen Void Eaters poured into the chamber, their fluid forms seemingly less affected by the radiation. Reed and his team opened fire, but conventional weapons had limited effect on the creatures. Keep working on the disruptors, Reed shouted, switching his rifle to plasma mode. I'll hold them off! He positioned himself between his team and the advancing Void Eaters, firing burst after burst of superheated plasma. Each hit caused the creatures to recoil, but they kept coming. Almost there, Captain, Morris called. Reed felt something wet on his upper lip, blood from his nose, a sign the radiation was breaking down his cellular structure. His vision began to blur. For Earth, he whispered, continuing to fire as his body failed him. For humanity. The disruptor activation sequence chimed its completion as Reed collapsed to his knees. Blood vessels in his eyes had begun to rupture, turning his vision crimson. The radiation was working faster than expected, breaking down his body from the inside out. Disruptors online, Captain, Morris reported, his own voice strained with pain. Remote detonation ready. But the signal won't penetrate this deep. Someone needs to stay. Reed nodded, understanding the implication. The plan had always called for a manual detonation, but they had hoped to at least retreat from the central hub before that became necessary. Help me up, Reed ordered. 2 surviving team members lifted him to his feet, his legs already losing sensation. Get everyone out. Fall back to the emergency extraction point. Sir, protested Specialist Ward. You can barely stand. Reed fixed her with a stern gaze through his visor. That's an order, Specialist. The mission comes first. Morris hesitated, then saluted. It's been an honor, Captain. The honor was mine, Reed replied. Now go. Tell them we did our duty. As his team retreated, Reed dragged himself to the control console. The Void Eaters had withdrawn temporarily, perhaps sensing the imminent detonation. Reed knew they would return in force once they realized what was happening. His radiation suit had begun to fail completely, alerts flashing across his heads-up display. The pain was becoming unbearable, even with his suit's medical systems working. Over time, every breath felt like inhaling fire. Reed activated his neural transmitter, the quantum device that would attempt to preserve his consciousness at the moment of death. The scientists had been unclear whether it would work, but it gave the volunteers some comfort to think their memories might survive. As he waited for the Void Eaters to return, Reed thought about the long history of human sacrifice. From ancient warriors to modern soldiers, humans had always been willing to die for their beliefs, their families, their species. Perhaps that was their true superpower. Not their resilience or adaptability, but their willingness to face death unflinchingly when necessary. The chamber doors burst open, and dozens of Void Eaters poured in, their forms shifting rapidly as they sensed the danger. You are too late, Reed told them, his finger hovering over the detonation control. Your invasion ends here. The lead creature flowed forward, its multiple eyes fixing on Reed with malevolent intelligence. Your death changes nothing, it said in that discordant voice. We will find another way. Reed smiled through blood-stained teeth. Perhaps, but not today. He pressed the detonation control. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the crystalline structure at the center of the hub began to pulse with increasing intensity. The energy waves grew violent, tearing at the very fabric of space-time. The Void Eaters shrieked, a sound that pierced Reed's mind like physical pain. They began to disintegrate as the quantum disruption field expanded. Reed felt his own body breaking down at the molecular level, yet strangely, the pain had stopped. Perhaps his nerve endings had already died. He watched with detached fascination as his hands began to glow with the same energy that was consuming the Void Eaters. His last conscious thought was of Earth's blue skies. Across the galaxy, every FTL communication system simultaneously broadcast the same message, Captain Thomas Reed's neural pattern, preserved in the instant of the gate's destruction. Not just his memories, but something more. His final moments of determination, courage, and sacrifice. Every sentient being in the Galactic Council space received the impression of a human choosing to die so that others might live. For many species, it was incomprehensible. For others, it was the first time they truly understood humans. 6 months after the destruction of the Threshold Gate, the Galactic Council convened in emergency session. The massive amphitheater on Centauri Prime was filled to capacity, with representatives from all member species in attendance. At the center of the chamber stood Admiral Drake, now bearing the additional title of Human Representative to the Council. The Void Eater threat has been neutralized, Drake reported, his voice carrying across the silent chamber. The collapse of the Sagittarius Gate created a quantum shockwave that destroyed their foothold in our dimension. Our patrols have found no sign of their return. Murmurs rippled through the assembly. Victory had come at a tremendous cost. 17 colony worlds had been lost before the Void Eaters were stopped. Billions of lives from dozens of species had been extinguished. We honor the sacrifice of the GCS Dauntless and her crew, said High Counselor Traz, rising from his seat. Particularly Captain Reed, whose final act saved us all. Drake nodded solemnly. Humanity appreciates your recognition, Counselor, but I am here today to discuss something else. A phenomenon we have come to call the Echo. The chamber quieted again. Everyone present knew what Drake meant. The mysterious transmission of Reed's consciousness had affected every corner of Council space. Our scientists believe that the quantum matrix preserving Captain Reed's neural pattern interacted with the collapsing gate, Drake explained. The result was an unprecedented psychic impression broadcast through the FTL network. It was more than an impression, interjected Counselor Nima. It was experience. We felt his pain, his determination, his humanity. Drake nodded. Yes. And we have been receiving reports from across Council space of changes, behavioral changes among various species. Footage began playing on the chamber's holographic displays, a Drex soldier throwing himself on an explosive device to save his squad mates, a Vesperi colony sharing resources with rival hives during a famine, a Ulan engineer working until system failure to save trapped miners. These incidents represent statistically significant behavioral shifts, Drake continued. Acts of self-sacrifice from species that have historically prioritized self-preservation. The chamber erupted in concerned discussion. Drake waited for the noise to subside before continuing. We believe Captain Reed's sacrifice has had a profound psychological impact across species boundaries. The echo seems to have transmitted not just his memories, but his core human values. High Counselor Traz leaned forward. Are you suggesting, Admiral, that this was mimetic transmission? A form of psychic contagion? Not contagion, Drake corrected firmly. Inspiration. For the first time, many species truly understood what drives humanity, our willingness to sacrifice for others, even those not of our kind. The council chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. For centuries, humans had been viewed with a mixture of respect and wariness, their emotional volatility and self-sacrificial tendencies considered primitive by many more evolved species. This brings me to my proposal, Drake said. The human government wishes to establish a new galactic initiative, the Reed Protocol, a volunteer force drawn from all species, dedicated to mutual defense and humanitarian intervention. You wish to spread this human philosophy of self-sacrifice? Asked a myth representative, their gaseous form swirling with agitation. We wish to acknowledge that Captain Reed's sacrifice revealed something profound, Drake replied. That across our biological and cultural differences we share common values, compassion, courage, and the willingness to protect others at personal cost. As the council debated, Drake received a private communication. On Earth, the quantum matrix containing Reed's consciousness had begun showing signs of activity. The scientists had been wrong. Something of Reed had survived, preserved in the quantum realm. Drake kept this information to himself for now. The galaxy was already changing in ways no one had predicted. Humans had always been known for pushing boundaries, for exceeding limitations. But perhaps their greatest contribution would be showing other species that limitations themselves were often illusory. The vote, when it came, was unprecedented, unanimous approval for the Reed Protocol. As Drake left the chamber, he wondered what Reed would think of his legacy. Not just saving the galaxy, but potentially changing its future course. That night, in his quarters, Drake reviewed reports from across human space. The memorial services for the dauntless crew had drawn attendance from species that had previously avoided human worlds. Something was changing in interspecies relations. His communication console chimed with an incoming message from Earth. The Reed matrix had stabilized. Whatever remained of Thomas Reed's consciousness had found a way to persist. Drake smiled. Humans had always had a habit of exceeding expectations, even their own. 3 years after the destruction of the Threshold Gate, Dr. Elaine Hart stood in her laboratory beneath the Olympus Mons research facility on Mars, watching as the quantum matrix housing Captain Reed's consciousness pulsed with coherent patterns. Neural activity is holding stable, reported her assistant, Dr. Malik. Whatever this is, it's not degrading. Hart nodded, studying the readings with a mixture of scientific fascination and personal awe. She had been part of the team that developed the neural preservation technology, but never expected it to work so completely. Reed's consciousness hadn't just been preserved, it had evolved. Has there been any success with communication? She asked. Malik shook his head. We've tried every conventional method. Whatever form of consciousness this is, it doesn't respond to normal stimuli. The laboratory door slid open, and Admiral Drake entered, followed by an unusual entourage. Representatives from 6 different council species, including a Drex, a Vesperi, and one of the rarely seen myth. Dr. Hart, Drake greeted her. The Xenosentience Coalition has arrived. Hart raised an eyebrow. The Coalition was a newly formed group of the galaxy's leading experts in consciousness studies across species. Their formation was directly tied to the Reed Protocol and the ongoing mystery of the Echo. Admiral, Hart acknowledged. I wasn't expecting such distinguished visitors. Our work here is still largely theoretical. The Drex representative, Dr. Saren, stepped forward. His scaled skin shimmered under the laboratory lights. Doctor, we believe your work is the key to understanding what happened, Saren said. The Echo affected all our species in ways we're still discovering. Hart gestured toward the quantum matrix. Captain Reed's consciousness persists, but we haven't established communication. It's preserved, but changed. The myth representative, whose name translated roughly as pattern within clouds, floated closer to the containment field. The gaseous being's environment suit emitted soft light as it studied the matrix. Not changed, the myth said. It's translated, voice melodic. Transcended. Hart frowned. I don't understand. The quantum energies of the gate collapse, the myth continued. They did not destroy consciousness. They elevated it. Captain Reed exists now in a state between dimensions. The room fell silent as the implications settled over them. Hart had suspected something similar, but hearing it confirmed by the myth, whose species naturally existed in a semi-gaseous state closer to energy than matter, gave the theory new weight. If that's true, Drake said slowly, then Reed isn't dead. Death is a biological concept, the Vesperi scientist clicked through her translator. What we are witnessing is metamorphosis. Hart moved to her console and brought up the latest scan results. We've detected increasing complexity in the matrix structure. It's as if the consciousness is building something. A vessel, the myth said with certainty. A means to interface with our dimension again. Drake's expression hardened. Are you suggesting Reed is trying to come back? Is that even possible? Hart shook her head. Not in the way you're thinking, Admiral. Whatever consciousness exists in that matrix, it's no longer human. At least not entirely. The quantum energies would have transformed it into something beyond our understanding. Then what is it trying to do? Drake asked. Before anyone could answer, the laboratory's sensors began registering massive energy spikes. The quantum matrix flared with blinding light, forcing everyone to shield their eyes. When the light faded, the matrix was gone. In its place hovered a sphere of swirling energy, pulsating with patterns that seemed almost like language. Containment. Field holding, Malik reported, his voice tense. But whatever that is, it's emitting quantum frequencies across the spectrum. The sphere expanded slightly, then contracted. Patterns of light danced across its surface in complex sequences. It's trying to communicate, Hart whispered. The myth floated closer. Yes, and I believe I can understand some of it. The being extended tendrils of gas that brushed against the containment field. For several minutes, there was silence as the myth and the energy sphere seemed to exchange information through patterns of light and gas movement. Finally, the myth withdrew. Remarkable, it said. The entity confirms it was once Captain Reed, but it is now something more. A bridge between dimensions. A bridge? Drake asked. To where? To everywhere, the myth replied. The destruction of the gate did not just stop the Void Eaters. It opened Captain Reed's consciousness to the multiverse itself. He has seen beyond. Hart's scientific mind raced with the implications. Is he trying to warn us about something? Another threat? No, the myth said. He is trying to show us what humans truly are. What they have always been. The sphere pulsed again, and suddenly every screen in the laboratory lit up with images. Human history, human achievements, human sacrifices, wars and peace, cruelty and kindness, the full spectrum of humanity's contradictions. We always thought humanity's defining trait was their resilience, the Drex scientist said quietly. Their ability to endure suffering beyond what other species could tolerate. We were wrong, the myth replied. Their defining trait is transformation. Humans don't just endure limits, they transcend them. The phenomenon that began in a Mars laboratory spread across the galaxy with unprecedented speed. What scientists initially called the Reed entity established contact with communication networks throughout Council space, manifesting in forms comprehensible to each species. To the silicon-based Ulan, it appeared as crystalline structures that transmitted information through harmonic vibrations. To the insectoid Vesperi, it communicated through complex pheromonal patterns that their most sensitive receivers could detect. To humans, it often appeared as a sphere of light that could form words or images when necessary. 1 year after its emergence, representatives from every council species gathered at the newly constructed Unity Station in neutral space. The massive habitat had been specifically designed for this historic summit, the first multidimensional cognition conference. Admiral Drake, now serving as human ambassador to the Council, addressed the assembled delegates. 5 years ago, humanity reached what many believed was our limit, he began. When Captain Reed volunteered for a mission with no return, we thought we had demonstrated the ultimate expression of human sacrifice. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the diverse assembly. We were wrong, Drake continued. What we witnessed was not an endpoint but a beginning. Not a limit reached, but a limit transcended. Behind him, a holographic display showed the Reed entity as it currently existed, a complex energy pattern that partially extended into dimensions beyond normal perception. Scientists had confirmed it contained the original neural patterns of Thomas Reed, but evolved into something far more complex. For centuries, many species viewed humans as primitive, too emotional, too willing to risk death, too attached to concepts like heroism and sacrifice, Drake said. These were seen as evolutionary limitations, remnants of our brief history, as a spacefaring species. He paused, looking across the assembly. Today, we understand these traits differently. What Captain Reed demonstrated was humanity's unique capacity for transcendence, our ability to convert limitation into transformation. Dr. Hart stepped forward next, her research team having spent the past year studying the entity and its communications. The Reed entity has provided us with profound insights, she explained. It exists simultaneously across multiple dimensions, perceiving reality in ways we're only beginning to comprehend. Yet it has chosen to maintain contact with us, to guide us. Guide us toward what? Called a delegate from the back of the chamber. Hart smiled. Toward our shared future. The entity has shown us that consciousness itself is not bound by physical laws as we understood them. What we perceived as death may be merely a transition. The myth representative floated to the center of the chamber. We have learned that the Void Eaters were not simply predators, but fallen beings who lost their way across dimensional boundaries. They consumed consciousness because they had forgotten how to create it. This revelation sent shockwaves through the assembly. The enemy that had nearly destroyed galactic civilization was not inherently evil, but lost and corrupted by isolation. The Reed entity has shown us doorways, the myth continued. Not gates that can be exploited and controlled, but natural passages between states of being. Humanity's gift to the galaxy was not just stopping the invasion. It was showing us a new path forward. As if summoned by these words, the air at the center of the chamber began to shimmer. The Reed entity manifested, its energy form more structured than before, almost humanoid in shape. For the first time in public, it spoke, not with sound, but directly into the minds of all present. I was Thomas Reed, it communicated. I am more now, as are you all, if you choose to be. The assembled delegates sat in stunned silence as images flowed into their minds. Visions of a future where consciousness was not limited by biology or physics, where death was not an end but a transformation, where species boundaries became fluid rather than fixed. The Void Eaters sought to consume what they could not understand, the entity continued. They feared the unknown. Humans embrace it. Admiral Drake stepped forward, addressing the entity directly. Is this why you've maintained contact? To show us this future? To show you possibilities, came the reply. Each species has gifts. Humans transform. Others preserve, create, connect, understand. Together, you become more than the sum. The galactic calendar was reset that day. The destruction of the Threshold Gate and the emergence of the Reed entity marked the beginning of a new era. The Age of Transcendence. Across thousands of worlds the story spread. Schools taught children of all species about the day humans, reached their supposed limit, only to demonstrate that true limits did not exist, merely transitions waiting to be made. The Void Eaters never returned, though the Reed entity warned they were not the only interdimensional beings humanity would encounter. But the galaxy was changed, prepared now in ways it hadn't been before. On Earth, in a small memorial garden, outside what had once been Captain Reed's home, a simple plaque stood among flowering plants. It bore no grand statements about heroism or sacrifice. Instead, it carried the message Reed had transmitted to his family before his final mission. Limits exist only until someone chooses to move beyond them. Today, it's my turn. Tomorrow, it may be yours. Never stop reaching. All species remembered the day humans reached their limit, and then showed the galaxy how to transcend it.